The morning was cold and heavy in New York City. Outside the federal courthouse, a loud crowd had gathered. Some people were shouting, "Protect AOC. She is our voice." Others screamed back, "Deport her. She is dangerous." Police officers stood between the groups, holding strong barriers, trying to control the chaos. Cameras flashed everywhere. News reporters spoke quickly into their microphones, sending live updates across the country. Inside the courtroom, the air was tense and tight. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, known to millions as AOC, sat in the defendant's chair. Her back was straight, her face was calm. But her hands, tightly gripping her knees, showed the truth. She was under heavy pressure. Her heart was racing. She was not used to being in a courtroom like this. She was used to fighting with words in Congress, but this was different. Here, one mistake could destroy her. She was accused of threatening law enforcement officers with violence. The words she had spoken in anger during a public rally now stood. Against her, "Lay a finger on them, we are going to have a problem." It was just one sentence, but it was enough to put her in this chair today. The man leading the attack against her was James Whitaker, a well-known government prosecutor. His sharp black suit and cold voice made him look like he was ready to cut through anyone who stood in his way. Sitting near him was Tom Homan, the former director of ICE. He had faced public criticism from AOC many times. He sat silently, arms crossed, his face hard and unmoved. He had come here to watch her fall. OC's defense team, led by the ACLU, whispered quietly around her. They had worked day and night to prepare. Okay? They knew the risk. This was not just about a court case. This was about her career, her reputation, and possibly her freedom. If they failed, AOC could lose her seat in Congress. Worse, she could be pushed out of politics forever. The judge struck his gavel, and the sharp sound echoed like thunder. Everyone turned their eyes to AOC. The trial had officially begun. James Whitaker stood first. His deep voice filled the room. He spoke slowly but powerfully, each word falling like a heavy hammer. He told the court that AOC was not just a politician. He said she was dangerous. He said her words had power, and she had used that power to spread threats against law enforcement. She told the public that violence would happen if anyone touched her supporters. She crossed the line. She broke the law, Whitaker said, pointing directly at AOC. The cameras captured every moment. Across the country, millions of people watched the live broadcast. Some cheered for Whitaker, agreeing with him. Others held their breath, afraid for AOC. Oak sat quietly, listening carefully. Her heart beat fast, but she refused to show fear. She knew the game. She had been in political battles before, but this time it was more serious. This time, the system was aiming to destroy her, not just defeat her. Outside the courthouse, the noise grew louder. Protesters waved signs. Some called her a hero. Others called her a threat to national security. Police struggled to keep them apart. Her lead lawyer, Sarah Green from the ACLU, stood next. She spoke clearly, challenging the prosecution. "This trial is not about justice," she said. "It is about silencing a voice that speaks against power." Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not on trial because she broke the law. She is on trial because she dared to speak the truth. Sarah reminded the court that AOC had always fought for immigrant children and families who were separated at the border. She argued that the system was angry because AOC had uncovered their mistakes and embarrassed powerful leaders. Prosecution pushed harder. They showed videos of AOC's past speeches where her words were fiery and emotional. They painted her as reckless and dangerous. Tom Homan watched with cold satisfaction. He had not forgotten the times AOC had humiliated him on national television. For him, this was personal. He wanted her gone. Inside her mind, AOC felt the weight of it all. Her supporters believed in her. Her enemies wanted her destroyed. The government was moving fast, using every tool to make an example out of her, but she also knew something else. This was not just about her words. There was something bigger at play. She could feel it. This was a battle carefully planned, not a random trial. Someone was pulling the strings behind the scenes. It's the first day of the trial ended. AOC walked out of the courtroom with cameras flashing in her face. Protesters cheered. Others booed. She did not say a word. She knew the fight was only beginning. The next morning, the courthouse was once again surrounded by crowds. Reporters gathered at every entrance, waiting for a statement. The air was full of tension, as if the entire country was holding its breath. Inside the courtroom, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat quietly, preparing herself for what was to come. Her lawyers had told her the prosecution would bring a surprise witness today. They didn't know who it was, but they knew it would be dangerous. When the judge entered, everyone stood. As soon as the trial resumed, Prosecutor James Whitaker walked to the center of the room. His face showed quiet confidence, as if he had already won. "Your Honor, we would like to call our next witness," Whitaker said, his voice firm. The doors opened, and a man in a dark suit stepped forward. The courtroom whispered. It was Michael Trent, a former staff member from Capitol Hill who had worked closely with both sides of the political aisle. AOC's heart sank. She recognized him. Michael had once been a quiet aide in Congress, someone who had attended private meetings, someone who knew what was said behind closed doors. Michael Trent sat down, adjusted his tie, and looked straight at AOC. Whitaker began to question him. "Mr. Trent, did you ever hear Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez speak about using threats to protect her political goals?" Whitaker asked. Michael hesitated. There were times when emotions were high. "I heard her say things that sounded like warnings, maybe even threats." The room fell silent. Whitaker pressed further. "Can you give us an example?" Michael looked uncomfortable. In one meeting, when discussing immigration raids, she said something like, "If they come for our people, we won't sit quietly. They'll regret it." The words hung heavy in the air. Reporters quickly scribbled notes. Cameras flashed, and the audience murmured. Sarah Green from the defense team stood up sharply. "Objection, Your Honor. That is not a direct threat. It is political speech." But Whitaker didn't stop. He showed messages, emails from AOC's team, some written quickly during heated protests, calling for mass gatherings at ICE offices. He tried to prove that AOC was not just passionate, she was dangerous. AOC listened carefully. She wanted to speak, to explain, but her lawyer whispered to stay silent. This was not the right time. When it was their turn, Sarah Green stood and cross-examined Michael Trent. "Mr. Trent, did Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez ever directly tell anyone to harm another person? Did she ever plan violence?" Michael's voice lowered. "No, she never said to hurt anyone directly, but the way she spoke, it inspired anger." Sarah pressed harder. "So you're saying she inspired people to care? To fight for their rights? That's what politicians do, isn't it?" Michael couldn't answer. The courtroom was still waiting. Outside, the crowds had grown. More people arrived, both supporters and protesters. The media called it one of the most divisive trials in modern politics. Some channels labeled AOC as a freedom fighter. Others called her a public threat. Back inside, the next witness was called. To everyone's surprise, it was Tom Homan himself. He walked confidently to the stand. His voice was cold and direct. When AOC attacked ICE in Congress, it wasn't just politics. She painted us as monsters. She made our jobs harder. Fueled hatred against law enforcement. Sarah Green stood and challenged him. "Mr. Homan, isn't it true that your policies separated thousands of children from their families? Isn't it true that you became the face of those policies?" Tom Homan's face tightened, but he answered, "We were following the law." But her words made it personal. She put our agents in danger. Sarah shot back. Or maybe she just made the country look at what was happening. The tension in the room was sharp. Everyone could feel that this was not just about one sentence AOC had spoken. This was about power, about who gets to control the story in America. Asked a court. Took a short break, AOC's lawyer pulled her aside. They're not just trying to silence you. There's something bigger happening here. Someone powerful wants you out of the picture. AOC nodded. She had suspected this from the start. This was not just about her words. It was about stopping her from rising any higher. When she returned to her seat, she was no longer just defending herself. She was preparing to uncover the truth about who was really behind this. The courtroom was quiet when the judge called everyone back to their seats. The next phase of the trial was about to begin, but something had changed in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She no longer looked like a nervous defendant. She sat straighter, her eyes sharper, her mind focused. She had decided to fight back, not just to protect herself, but to expose what was really happening. Her lead lawyer, Sarah Green, whispered quickly, "We found something. There are connections between the prosecution's key supporters and a private lobbying firm. They have been pushing hard to pass new security laws that would silence political protests." AOC's heartbeat quickened. "Do you have proof?" Sarah nodded. "We're getting it, but we need more time." In the courtroom, the prosecution continued their attacks. James Whitaker brought up more evidence: social media posts, speeches, video clips, all showing AOC as loud, emotional, and uncompromising. He painted her as a dangerous leader who encouraged crowds to confront ICE agents directly. Whitaker's words were sharp. "This isn't about free speech. It's about creating public fear. It's about pushing people toward dangerous action." Sarah Green stood calmly. "This is about a woman using her voice when the system refuses to listen. Isn't that what democracy is?" But Whitaker was prepared. He revealed new security footage of a protest where people were seen clashing with officers. He claimed that AOC's speeches had caused these violent moments. Then, suddenly, the courtroom's attention shifted. A journalist sitting in the back handed Sarah Green a note. Sarah read it quickly and her eyes widened. She leaned toward AOC and whispered, "We just got access to emails from Whitaker's office. There's evidence that this case was carefully built to destroy you. And it's not just about you, it's about silencing political opposition before the next election." AOC's hands tightened into fists. "Can we use this?" "We can, but it's risky," Sarah warned. "If we bring this out now, the prosecution will fight hard to block it. They will claim it's fake. The judge might even dismiss it if we can't connect it fast." AOC thought for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Let's bring the fight." When the court resumed, Sarah stood and requested to introduce new evidence. Whitaker immediately objected, but the judge allowed her to speak. Sarah presented emails that showed conversations between senior political strategists and Whitaker's team. The emails discussed the goal of the trial: to discredit AOC before primary season. The courtroom was shocked. Reporters rushed to send updates to their newsrooms. The judge called a short recess to review the documents. Outside the courthouse, the mood shifted. Protesters began shouting louder in support of AOC. News channels cut into their regular broadcasts to cover the breaking story. Inside, AOC's team moved quickly. They contacted a whistleblower who had worked inside the lobbying firm connected to Whitaker. The whistleblower agreed to testify. When the court resumed, Sarah called the new witness, Maria Ellis. Maria nervously walked to the stand. She explained how the lobbying firm had worked with certain political players to target high-profile progressive politicians. "They wanted to silence her," Maria said, pointing to AOC, "because she was too loud, too influential, because she had the power to move people." Whitaker tried to break Maria's testimony, accusing her of lying for attention, but Maria remained calm. She provided more emails, more meeting records. The courtroom was no longer against AOC. Now, people were questioning the prosecution's real motives. The judge, clearly disturbed by the evidence, asked Whitaker directly if these accusations were true. Whitaker tried to defend himself, but his confidence was cracking. AOC's lawyer pressed further. Is this justice? Or is this political warfare dressed up as a trial? The judge said the trial would continue, but she allowed the defense to fully explore this new line of evidence. As the session ended, AOC walked out of the courtroom, surrounded by flashing cameras. The reporters shouted questions, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. The story had already changed. Inside her, she felt the weight of the next step. This was bigger than saving her career now. This was about revealing how power moves in silence, how the system can crush anyone who dares to fight it. She was ready for the next round. And this time, she would not just defend herself, she would tear open the hidden parts of the game. Then, Courtroom returned the next morning with a new kind of energy. The story had exploded across the country overnight. Major news outlets, both supportive and critical of AOC, were now questioning the integrity of the prosecution. People outside the courthouse carried signs that no longer just supported or opposed. They now asked bigger questions. Who is controlling justice? Who decides what is a crime? Inside, AOC sat quietly as her legal team organized documents and prepared witnesses. She felt the weight of history pressing on her shoulders, but she also felt strangely calm. This was no longer just about her words at a protest. This was about the system itself. As the judge entered, the room fell silent. The prosecution seemed nervous now. James Whitaker's face had changed. The sharp, confident man was now cautious, calculating his next step carefully. Sarah Green, AOC's lawyer, wasted no time. She stood and called their next witness, Thomas Gregory, a former security analyst who had worked closely with the Department of Homeland Security. Thomas had requested to speak after watching the trial unfold on television the night before. Thomas walked to the witness stand, his face serious, his voice steady. He explained that during his time at the agency, he had seen multiple operations where political figures were quietly monitored. Not for security threats, but for political control. There was a list, Thomas said, his words chilling the room, a list of people considered problematic because they could shift public opinion too quickly. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was on that list. The courtroom buzzed. Reporters whispered quickly to their cameras, sending live updates. AOC sat still, her jaw tight, but her eyes fixed on Thomas. James Whitaker quickly objected, calling the witness unreliable and saying this was turning into a conspiracy circus. But the judge, seeing the importance of the testimony, allowed Thomas to continue. Sarah leaned into her questions carefully. Was this list connected to this trial? Thomas answered, I don't have the final paperwork, but the same law firms, the same lobbying groups, and some of the same names connected to those monitoring operations are now funding this prosecution. The judge asked sharply, Are you suggesting this trial was part of a planned effort to remove Representative Ocasio-Cortez from office? Thomas nodded. Yes, Your Honor, and not just her. There are more names on that list. The air in the courtroom was heavy. It wasn't just about whether AOC had crossed a legal line with her words. It was now about whether the entire case was a political weapon. Suddenly, Whitaker changed his strategy. He stood and accused AOC's team of staging a media attack, using surprise witnesses to damage the justice system. He turned to AOC and said coldly, You think you can twist this into your victory? You've still made that threat? That doesn't change. AOC for the first time stood and answered him directly, her voice clear, her emotions controlled but powerful. I spoke those words to protect children. I spoke those words because what was happening in those detention centers was wrong. You want to put me on trial? Fine. But let's not pretend this is about a sentence in a speech. This is about power. If you are trying to silence a movement, you want to scare the next person who stands up. The room fell silent. Even Whitaker had no quick response. The judge ordered a recess. Outside, the news media had shifted their focus completely. Now, headlines questioned whether the justice system was being manipulated for political gain. AOC and her team gathered in a side room. Sarah whispered urgently, "We have one more lead. A document that connects Whitaker's office to the lobbyists directly. If we can get it, this whole trial could collapse." AOC knew this wasn't over. The prosecution was wounded, but still dangerous. They would fight harder now, maybe even play dirtier. But she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. The public was watching with new eyes. People were asking questions they hadn't dared to ask before. The battle was far from finished, but for the first time, AOC could see a path forward, not just to win the trial, but to uncover a deeper, darker network that reached beyond her case. She tightened her fist and whispered to herself, "We're not backing down." Not now. The next day, the atmosphere inside the courthouse was different. The pressure was heavier now, but something else had changed. The public was no longer just watching. They were investigating, digging, questioning everything. AOC's case had gone from a courtroom drama to a national conversation. Inside the defense room, Sarah Green was reviewing the documents they had just received from an anonymous source. AOC sat across from her, waiting, her nerves tightly wound. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the last few pages. "This is it," Sarah finally said, her voice low but sharp. "This is the document we needed." It was a financial report linking James, Whitaker's private law firm, to lobbying groups that had close financial ties with private detention. Center specifically, the same ones involved in the ICE operations that AOC had condemned. There were also indirect donations to Whitaker's Political Action Committee from these same groups. AOC leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "So it was never about my words. It was about protecting their profits." Sarah nodded. "Exactly. You hit the system where it hurt, and they came after you." The team knew this was their strongest weapon, but the timing was dangerous. If they presented this too aggressively, the judge might see it as a personal attack, not a legal argument. If they moved too slowly, Whitaker could find a way to block it. As the court resumed, the judge looked more guarded. The previous day's revelations had already shaken the case. Sarah stood, her calm voice slicing through the quiet room. "Your Honor, new evidence has come to light that directly questions the motive behind this prosecution." Whitaker quickly jumped up. "Your Honor, we object. This is an attempt to derail the process with last-minute distractions." But the judge allowed Sarah to proceed. She presented the financial records, walking the court through each connection carefully, building a quiet but devastating chain of influence. Whitaker's face hardened, his voice, usually steady, cracked slightly as he tried to explain the connections away. "These donations are legal. These are normal political activities." Sarah pressed harder. "Normal. When the same private companies that benefit from detaining migrants are also funding the man prosecuting a congresswoman who exposed their abuses. When does political activity become political revenge?" The judge leaned forward, now clearly disturbed. Then Sarah made her final move. "We also received testimony from a former employee inside Whitaker's firm, who says this prosecution was recommended and fast-tracked after Representative Ocasio-Cortez's speech caused financial losses for the lobbying groups involved. This wasn't a neutral decision. This was targeted." The courtroom was frozen. The defense had landed a blow Whitaker could not immediately recover from. For the first time, the prosecution's case looked weak, even unstable. Outside the courthouse, protesters from both sides had grown louder. Some still called for AOC's punishment, but others now chanted about corruption, about money controlling the justice system. AOC sat quietly as the judge called for another recess. Her heart was beating fast, but she kept her face calm. In the hallway, Sarah whispered to her, "They'll try something now. They won't let this end quietly." AOC looked around at the cameras, the reporters, the guards. "Let them try," she said softly. "We didn't come this far twofold." Later that afternoon, Whitaker requested a closed-door meeting with the judge. The defense objected, but the judge allowed it under strict rules. When Whitaker returned, his expression had changed. He no longer looked like a man chasing justice. He looked like a man trying to escape a sinking ship. The judge called both sides to attention. "In light of the new evidence, I will allow time for further investigation before this trial proceeds. I will also allow the defense to submit the financial records into official court evidence." The room erupted in murmurs. It was not a final victory, but it was a turning point. Whitaker's power was crumbling. His plan to quietly convict AOC had fallen apart in front of the nation. AOC glanced at Sarah. "We've opened the door," she said quietly. "Now we walk through it." But she also knew the fight wasn't finished. It might never truly be finished. There were more names, more trials waiting in the shadows. And she was ready to face them the next morning. The courthouse was surrounded by more cameras than ever before. News vans lined the streets, commentators, and analysts argued live on television about what this trial had become. It was no longer just about AOC's words. It had turned into something much bigger, a fight about corruption, influence, and the secret power behind political decisions. Inside the defense room, AOC's team prepared for what they knew would be a brutal day. Sarah Green laid out their final strategy on the table, her voice steady but urgent. "They're going to push back hard today," she said. "Whitaker knows he's losing. He'll try to bring in emergency witnesses, surprise evidence, anything, to control the story again." AOC nodded, feeling the weight of everything. She had been fighting for years, but this battle was different. This wasn't just about politics. It was about survival. When the trial resumed, Whitaker stood up with a slight smirk, as if he still had one last card to play. "Your Honor," he began, "the prosecution requests to admit a new witness, a federal agent who claims to have been personally threatened by Representative Ocasio-Cortez." Gasps filled the room. AOC's heart skipped for a moment, but she didn't flinch. The judge raised an eyebrow. Why was this witness not disclosed earlier? Whitaker replied smoothly. The agent only came forward last night after realizing the seriousness of the case. The judge allowed the witness. A man in a black suit entered the courtroom, his face cold and distant. He introduced himself as Agent Robert Hayes from Homeland Security. Whitaker asked him to repeat the alleged threat. The agent said, "I was present during a protest in Washington, D.C. 2 years ago. I overheard Representative Ocasio-Cortez say to a group of activists, 'We will crush them if they don't stand down.'" AOC's defense team immediately challenged the statement. Sarah stood quickly. "Agent Hayes, did you file an official report at that time?" "No," the agent admitted. "Were there any recordings, any witnesses who heard this besides you?" "No recordings. No other witnesses that I know of." The courtroom grew tense. Sarah pressed harder. "So you're asking us to believe your memory from 2 years ago with no supporting evidence?" Whitaker objected, but the judge allowed Sarah to continue. She turned to the jury. "This is the desperation of a collapsing case. They are dragging ghosts from the past with no proof, hoping we will believe them simply because they wear a badge." The jury looked uncomfortable. Some seemed doubtful of the agent's story. Whitaker's final attempt to shift the focus was falling apart, but Sarah wasn't done. She brought out another document they had quietly obtained that morning. It showed Agent Hayes had previously worked with one of the same lobbying groups connected to Whitaker's funding sources. When Sarah revealed this, Whitaker's face tightened. He tried to argue it was unrelated, but the damage was done. The jury now saw a pattern and network protecting itself, using whatever tools were necessary. As the trial neared its end, the judge ordered closing arguments. Whitaker stood first. He repeated his position that words have power, that public officials must be held responsible, that AOC's language was dangerous. His voice was calm, but it no longer carried the force it once had. Then Sarah stepped forward. Her words were simple but heavy. This was never about a sentence AOC said in anger. This was about silencing someone who challenged a system that profits from human suffering. This trial is about power and who controls the truth. She looked directly at the jury. You are the last line between justice and political revenge. The room was silent. Reporters could barely keep up, typing furiously. When the judge dismissed them for deliberation, everyone knew the jury's decision would echo far beyond the courthouse walls. Outside, protesters waited anxiously. Some still held signs calling AOC a threat. Others had switched their chants, now shouting for justice, for accountability, for the truth to be protected. In the defense room, AOC sat quietly, looking out the window at the storm of people and cameras. Sarah sat beside her. You did everything right. AOC gave a tired smile. Right isn't always safe. Sarah nodded. But it's always necessary. They didn't know how the jury would decide. But they knew this fight had already changed the conversation, had already pulled back the curtain on the quiet forces that shaped public battles. And win or lose, AOC was ready for the verdict. The jury deliberated for hours. The tension inside the courthouse was unbearable. News channels around the world ran live coverage. The question was simple, but the answer would change everything. Was AOC guilty of inciting violence, or was she being used as a political target? In the defense room, AOC sat with her team watching the news without speaking. Her phone buzzed constantly, but she ignored it. Supporters outside continued their chants, but they were growing quieter, waiting for the final word. Finally, a court officer knocked on the door. The jury has reached a verdict. The walk back into the courtroom felt like crossing a battlefield. Reporters flashed their cameras. Every step AOC took echoed in the silent room. The judge entered and asked the jury if they had come to a decision. The jury foreman, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, stood and held the verdict slip in her trembling hands. We, the jury, find the defendant, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, not guilty. The courtroom exploded. Half the room cheered. The other half sat in stunned silence. The protesters outside reacted instantly. Some screamed in anger, others cried in relief. AOC's shoulders dropped, the weight finally lifting. Sarah squeezed her hand tightly. The judge banged the gavel. For order. This court is adjourned. Tom Homan left the courtroom without a word, his face unreadable. James Whitaker tried to control his disappointment, but the cameras caught his tight jaw and clenched fists. His plan to break AOC had failed. AOC stepped outside to face the crowd. Microphones and cameras rushed toward her. Reporters shouted questions. How do you feel about the verdict? Do you believe this was a political attack? What will you do next? AOC raised her hand, asking for silence. Her voice was calm but firm. This trial was never about me. It was about whether truth can survive when power wants to crush it. They thought they could scare me. They thought they could silence me. But I'm still standing, and I will not stop. The crowd erupted in applause. She continued, This is not just my fight. This is your fight. It's a fight for those who have no voice. It's a fight for those who suffer in silence while the powerful protect themselves. Her words echoed across the streets, broadcast live to millions. Sarah leaned in and whispered, You just wrote tomorrow's headlines. But the battle was not over. Later that evening, AOC met with her most trusted allies in a quiet office away from the cameras. Sarah laid out what they had uncovered during the trial. Whitaker was not acting alone. His campaign funding, the surprise witness. The ICE connections they all traced back to an international lobbying network. It's bigger than we thought. AOC's eyes narrowed. They wanted to destroy me to hide something else, Sarah nodded. The same groups that buried human trafficking investigations, that silenced whistleblowers, that protected private detention centers. This is the machine. AOC sat back in her chair, thinking carefully. We can't just survive this. We have to expose them. Sarah's face lit up. Then we go deeper. Investigative documentaries, leaked files, independent media. We don't stop. AOC smiled for the first time in days. Good, because I'm not afraid of them anymore. Across the city, Whitaker was meeting with his remaining supporters. He was furious, but also cautious. We lost this round, he admitted, but this isn't over. She's more dangerous now. His allies asked what they should do next. Whitaker's answer was cold. We wait. We watch. And we make sure the next battle is one she won't see coming. The story would continue. The courtroom fight was over, but the war for truth, power, and survival was only beginning. And in this war, nothing would ever be simple again.